The Hoenn Battle Frontier. It's the highest challenge in Generation 3 Pokemon, and only those who have cleared the main story of the games are given entry to it. Trainers from all over the Pokemon world come here to test the might and mettle of their hard-raised Pokemon and their time-tested strategies. The Frontier isn't really one single challenge like the Pokemon League though. It's a whopping 7 challenges in one, each with their own specific battle facility. But they also aren't just 7 different but similar dungeons. Each facility is designed to challenge you in specific ways by employing a gimmick on top of the core structure of bringing 3 Pokemon to go up against 3 other Pokemon, and trying to win as many battles as you can in a row. These 7 gimmicks come in the form of unique rule sets and structuring for each challenge, and are designed with testing certain qualities of the trainer in mind. Certain facilities like the Battle Pike or Battle Pyramid will have the challenge revolve around navigating a dungeon on top of the battles, while others will change the logistical structure of the battles, like fighting through a bracket at the Battle Dome or earning points from the judges at the Battle Arena. More classic 3v3 battle challenges are still in place too though, whether that's at the Battle Tower where you bring the best you've got for a climb to the top, or at the Battle Factory where you do the same thing with loner Pokemon. But then finally, there's the Battle Palace, a facility that's a little bit different from the rest. Now the palace probably isn't the hardest facility by any means. That honor usually goes to the factory, but it is definitely around the top in terms of difficulty. I would, however, describe the palace as the most unfair facility. Maybe one of the most unfair challenges in all of Pokemon. And I'm choosing that word, unfair, very carefully in my description of it, rather than simply calling it difficult. The palace has a simple twist. Instead of commanding your Pokemon to fight as usual, you must merely sit back and watch as your Pokemon choose their own moves entirely of their own volition. And that's a lovely idea for a world like Pokemon. Your partners fighting for themselves according to their own strategy and styles. You need to have a strong enough bond and connection with your Pokemon to give them the tools they can use to best live up to their potential. A trainer must properly design a Pokemon's pool of 4 moves to complement that Pokemon's natural style. And all of that is described in a word by the facility: Spirit. The palace is supposed to be a test of the trainer's spirit, with those who find success at it being rewarded the spirit symbol. 21 wins in a row will net you the silver symbol, and then 42 in a row for the gold. Now this is a beautiful concept for the narrative of Pokemon, and it's one that's been captured well by the anime and manga on multiple occasions. But what does all that spirit business really mean in the game itself? How does it actually work in the game's code? And why am I out here molding that it's so unfair? Well, first and foremost, it's obviously not entirely random how they pick a Pokemon's moves. A Pokemon's style, so to speak, is determined by its nature. It is the main thing that decides how a Pokemon will choose its moves in battle. And then all moves have been lumped into one of 3 categories: attack, defense, and support. And then put together, every nature gives a Pokemon a different likelihood to pick moves out of each category. To give an example, a hardy-natured Pokemon favors attacking moves, a neutral feeling towards support moves, and a disdain for defense moves, with each individual nature having a different spread along those lines. Every round, a Pokemon will decide what style move it's going to choose using those odds that are dictated by its nature. If there's more than one move in that category, the game's normal AI will try to select the best move for the situation. But if there's no moves for the selected category available, then there's a 50% chance to skip your turn entirely, which is a pretty huge bummer of a semi-random chance in a place like this. So let's start with the obvious. This is going to be tough. The Battle Frontier is hard enough as it is. Matches are best of ones, the game is throwing the strongest Pokemon it has to offer at you, and then success is hinging on winning a bunch of rounds all in a row. Pokemon's got plenty of X factors and randomness as it is, but now we have to contend with fighting through this autopilot spirit bond business on top of it. It can be an extremely frustrating gauntlet. Even with Pokemon totally optimized for the task, there's always still a chance that the worst happens with nothing you can do about it. Your Pokemon chooses the wrong category of move for the situation, or you get that skip turn that loses you the match. And that's still at the peak of optimization. What about everyone else? What about me and the team I work through the game with? Someone might say, and someone maybe being me. And that's where I'd say the deeper issue unfolds. The issue with the palace is how unfriendly it is to the average player. The general barrier to entry at the Frontier is pretty high already. It's a big jump from the main game, but the one at the palace is astronomical. and that primarily comes from the usage of natures to determine a Pokemon's AI, with the consequences of that mechanic affecting both casual and serious players alike. I could have a Pokemon that I use the entire game that I'm incredibly attached to, and then find that it has a nature that renders it practically unusable at this facility. It'll probably work at the other facilities, but with a handful of certain natures, it might not even be able to last around at the palace. Take Shiny Sploink here, for instance. Yeah, that's right. I burned the Midnight Oil and I brought home Shiny Sploink. This legend has finally entered the picture. Shiny Sploink is an unwavering champion, and my original plan for them was to be a debut with the palace, but since I caught it in the wild, I had to take what I was given for its nature, which in this case is lax, giving it a serious inclination for support moves rather than the attack moves I would prefer. I imagine it could still work, but Grumpig is naturally an attacker, and it offers little in the way of support moves, so I'm not gonna hold my breath. Try as I might, this is not a good Pokemon for the palace. Got this really special, one-of-a-kind guy in Shiny Sploink, but suddenly she's entirely unusable because of this arbitrary rule set. Fear not though, Shiny Sploink fans. Shiny Sploink will return when we climb the battle pyramid. Yes! But for now, they've been sidelined. The key, at the end of the day, when it comes to the general experience, isn't optimizing for success, it's avoiding too much frustration. But let's look at the other side of that. Let's say I do have an optimal Pokemon, where I've grinded for the right IVs, I've got a good EV set, and I made sure that the nature complemented the Pokemon's abilities. There are still Pokemon nature combinations that the palace doesn't favor, even if I've done that. For example, it's very common to build a special sweeper using a modest nature, because it increases special attack and lowers attack. And since you won't be using physical attacks, it's a pure gain statistically. And yet at the palace, modest nature favors defensive moves. My perfectly spec'd all 31 IV, 252 in special attack and speed Latios would be completely outclassed, even though the rest of the game communicated with me that that was the ideal setup. No one wants to be told, serious and casual alike, that they need to rebuild a Pokemon or start a team from scratch. And then it's that word I used, communication, the way that the game communicates with the player. Because you might be wondering at this point, how do I or anyone else know what moves a nature favors or any other facets of this place? Where am I getting all my intel from? And if you're trying to take a serious swing at this place, that answer is Bulbapedia. But how does the game itself communicate the tenets of this challenge to the player? I want to look at the way that the game talks to us and instructs us on how to go through with this challenge. Because it's a very strong belief of mine that a game can gracefully employ significant complexity, very much like what we're seeing here, as long as it also offers communication and hints that aid the player in getting a handle on that complexity. So with that idea in mind, let's take a look around the place. See what the rules say, see if there's any talk amongst the NPCs about how we proceed. We can even look at the guidebooks for Pokemon Emerald. Right next to the left front desk, there's a rules board with a decent amount of information. We got battle basics, covering that general premise that the Pokemon pick moves for themselves. Sounds great. Pokemon nature and moves, showing us that moves have been put into the 3 distinct categories and then picked based on nature. All makes sense so far. I don't love that the underpowered tab says that if a Pokemon doesn't have moves that matches its nature, it will often be unable to live up to its potential. It's a very vague way of saying skip your turn, but I guess we'll find out soon enough with some trial and error, so it's not a big deal. And then probably the most interesting tab of all is when in danger. It's not something I've brought up yet, and it's probably the most hidden technicality of the whole gimmick, so don't worry, we'll get into it. But for now, it lets us know that when a Pokemon is in trouble, it may start using moves that don't match its nature. But what does trouble mean, and how do the nature preferences change? The rules board is an okay start, but I still don't really get it. In an actual battle, when you drop to half health, you'll get a message like, your Pokemon is getting into position, indicating that their style is shifted, so that's easy enough to understand. But still, most importantly, is there actually someone to tell me what nature does what and how that shifts when they get into trouble? And yeah, there is, sort of, I guess. In the main lobby, we have 2 guys who explain the preferences of hardy and lax nature, one of them telling you that there's this girl that can tell what Pokemon are thinking. Now that sounds valuable. She lives in the house next door on the left. And finally, we get the in-game NPC who explains how the natures dictate the moves. So it is here. Show her any Pokemon and she'll tell you what type of move is its favorite and then what move it prefers when it has ouchies, known as trouble at the rules desk. Okay, but that's great. Just using the resources in the game, we can figure out what type of moves a Pokemon likes, how that shifts when it's in danger, and then some of the finer technical details of how the palace works. All of that is wonderful, and I'd love it if that was the whole story. But like plenty of other things in Pokemon, they have hidden a mass of needless complications to that overall explanation, hidden beneath the surface that are not communicated at all by the world itself. But unlike usual, those finer details go a long way here to make the experience even less friendly for the player than it already is. So now, let's finally draw our attention to the Nintendo Power Guide and then the actual data in the game to explain what I'm talking about. The guide offers a wealth of new information, which is great for people like me who love paying more to understand a game that I already bought. Not that they really do paperback guides anymore, but you get what I mean. We get the category of every move, which I think was obvious for some, but maybe not so much for others. Like would I describe the move Rain Dance as defense or support? Now I don't have to, they can just tell me. And then the really fascinating part is the nature table. I thought Pokemon just liked one category more than the others, but now they're telling us that it's actually a 5-point scale. Where was that explanation in the actual game? I guess this is why I bought the guide though, for top secret info like this. Alright, so now I can use the actual, more descriptive information to put together a real slugger of a Pokemon for the Battle Palace. If I'm reading this correctly, I can take either Brave or Sassy nature for the biggest chance of attacking and the lowest chance of anything else. And I guess since there's no difference, I'll go with Brave for the attack boost. Sounds pretty good. But surprise! That's wrong! Because Sassy actually has a higher chance for using attacking moves. An 88% chance versus Brave's 70% chance. And in a game mode where consistency is everything for getting those win streaks, it's a pretty major difference. But how did I know that awfully specific piece of information? Those detailed numbers, along with the breakdowns for the other categories and natures, are the actual values in the game's code, and after being data mined, they were posted on an easy-to-read table on Bulbapedia. That is to say, as players, we're not really supposed to know them. Just about every nature, when weighed versus the game's code versus the guide, has discrepancies like this. The actual way that this place works has been obscured beneath the information in the guide, which is obscured beneath the information that's given in the game. And sure, these are minor mechanical differences, but I just can't understand what the point of hiding the actual numbers is or making them different between the in-game advice, the guide, and the actual code. They should all say the same thing so that everyone knows what's going on. In actuality, almost every nature above and below half health has its own unique numerical configuration for move likelihood, with pros and cons to be weighed across the entire table. And all that is just for understanding the prep work. I've been working through the process of trying to figure out what works and what doesn't, and be able to work on strategy on my own. That's just the frustrating beginning to this difficult place. And then after that prep work, actually doing it and doing it well requires building entirely new teams and Pokemon with movesets that complement their likelihood to pick out of each category. Now that I have the actual story on how this place works and I can efficiently plan for it, I still have to get together new Pokemon with the right natures, put together their movesets, and then muscle through the mind-numbing RNG waiting for me on every turn. Natures can't be changed in this game and will have to be selected for, and then TMs are generally one per game, and I might have to trade those in. So I'm sorry, Shiny Sploink. I already used Calm Mind on Latios, so we're gonna have to visit Kanto to get another one for you. Building new Pokemon in Gen 3 is a tough, time-consuming task that is a lot of the battle by itself sometimes. And for sure, a lot of this stuff is par for the course for the battle frontier, but it feels like there's a lot of extra unfriendliness that's been baked in here specifically. There's discrepancies about how the gimmick exactly works. The optimal palace natures don't match those that would be considered optimal in the rest of the game. The necessity for oddly built Pokemon that might not be right for other challenges. And then it's all combined with the rage-worthy RNG that is the entire basis of the gimmick. It's a strategy and team building problem, but our ability to rise to the occasion is being purposefully obscured. And don't get me wrong, once you're actually put together and do get all prepped, it's definitely not insurmountable. I got the silver symbol mainly using Latios and Melodic, and the only thing that really made me mauled was the palace boss. His team is loaded with cheap feeling, luck focused win conditions. a Crobat with Double Team and Confuse Ray, and then a Lapras with Horn Drill of all things. You just have to pray going up against stuff like that. That's kind of the whole gag at this point. Outside of switching, you don't have to do any major strategizing in the moment because the AI is going to do it for you. And so it's just as likely that you do get lucky rather than getting rolled by being unlucky. The strategy comes through in the prep work, but that's been made its own difficult battle with the information that the game is seemingly unwilling to give you. Complexity isn't the issue. That's the core piece that allows players to strategize and dive into a game, but complexity has to be paired with accurate information to allow the rise to that occasion. The Battle Palace is close to me calling it the most difficult place in Pokemon, but I think I'd be more precise to describe it as one of the most unfriendly or unwelcoming, or I dare say even the most unfair place in Pokemon. That's all I got for you folks. Thanks a lot if you made it this far. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you thought down below. Good luck out there at the Battle Frontier, everybody. I gotta get back to the gym with Shiny Splank. I'll see you next time. Droomish out.